So the ACEs research has shown that the more traumatic incidents you have in your childhood, the more likely you are to have more trauma or be re-traumatized later on. So if you have 4 or more, you're more likely to end up using mental health services, substance misuse services, accommodation support services, and possibly be in trouble with the criminal justice system. Obviously there are exceptions to that because the ACEs studies are general studies of thousands of people in the population. And it also showed how common trauma was. So lots of people experience trauma in the general population. And it's only when we get stuck in our trauma reaction that it can cause problems such as self-harming, alcohol and drugs. Often we can process the traumas in life in a positive way by talking them through with someone else, making sense of them. So the more traumas you have, the research shows that you're more likely to get caught up in what's called a vicious re-traumatizing circle. And I'll give an example of that. So what might happen is, if you've had lots of difficulties and childhood trauma, and then as a teenager you start maybe drinking and realizing, oh, that makes me feel better, like a painkiller, the emotional pain of maybe feeling guilt and shame and resentment and anger and fear is taken away by a drug or by taking alcohol. And so you develop a problem of repetitive excess of alcohol. Then maybe you lose your job, and that might mean you lose your house, so you end up in a big homeless hostel maybe with other very troubled people, and you get bullied in there. And so do you see how the more trauma you have, and those unhelpful reactions to trauma such as addiction or other problems could lead to more problems, and you're more vulnerable and more likely to get into a vicious trauma circle where your whole life ends up being full of lots of adversity and lots of difficulties and lots of trauma. And the way to break that, the research shows, is that relationships are key. So if someone comes along in any role and starts to form a healthy, positive relationship with someone, that's often what people describe the point at which a vicious trauma circle started to turn around into a virtuous circle of healing and hope and recovery, because people start to see things in a different way and maybe start approaching life in a different way, see that they can learn some skills to handle their emotions maybe better, learn some skills to problem solve, get some hope about the future, that they could get a job maybe, or some voluntary work or a place in the world to belong, which is what all human beings need. And so that's the key point. We want to help turn a vicious circle of re-traumatization into a virtuous circle of recovery, hope and healing from trauma. And the way that tends to happen is through positive relationships, which is great. And that's one of the things that we can offer people. So if I think about myself, when I was a teenager, I'd experienced childhood trauma and I was full of anger and resentment about my abuse. I used to drink and take drugs to kind of self-medicate, make myself feel better. I struggled in my 20s to hold down employment. I was unemployed for about 5 years. So I was considered as one of the long-term unemployed or unemployable. And so I felt I had no place in the world. And so there was an accumulation of shame about not being able to function very well socially. I was in and out of the psychiatric hospital many times, and I felt shame about that as well. So you see how there's the adversity, the current adversity, you end up caught up in a circle. And so part of recovery is learning to identify how I felt. So when I connected with people who were positive and helpful, part of my recovery journey was to notice and name when I felt annoyed or when I felt anxious, and to be able to process those feelings better. Whereas before, when I was caught up in that vicious trauma circle, I'd feel that anger and resentment and shame and guilt, and I wouldn't know what that was. It just felt like an awful ball of I'm an awful person, like low self-esteem. And then I'd drink and take drugs, and then I'd end up with scrapes, and then I'd end up maybe back in the psychiatric hospital. So that's an example about handling emotions. So recovery is about not just feeling awful and then understandably maybe drinking to take that feeling away, but learning new skills to handle those emotions better, see that it's normal to feel stuff as a human being, And that's important to hold in mind, that that's one area of handling emotions where people can get better and learn some new skills. And then it also affects our physicality, our body. So in terms of trauma, can have this impact on us, and if we don't process it, it can come out in physical ways like headaches, eczema with stress. That's sometimes called somatization, where the body feels the impact of the trauma. It can lead to lots of kind of physical problems. It can also physically make us feel a lot. So when if we're triggered by something that reminds us about a past trauma, a lot of emotion can get released in the body, and that can make us feel a lot of adrenaline. It can make us feel a lot of physical fear, so we might have a knot in our stomach, and that's a physical bodily sensation. And then the body wants to survive, and so without thinking, before you actually think about it, the survival mode of the body, flooded by all that emotion physically, may want to fight and get into an argument and to defend myself, or it may flop because that's like a way the body knows that it might increase its survival. It might just like, it's almost like feeling that you're playing dead, as it were, but it's a physical experience, if that makes sense. So there's fighting and flopping and flight. You might just want to get out and avoid the situation. So if my physical body feels all this anxiousness, I feel I'm in a threatening situation, I might just say, I'm off, I'm out of here. So fight, flight, or flop are three common reactions the body can have physically when it feels threatened, because it's reminded or triggered by something from a past trauma. And all that happens in a second, before we start making sense of, well, why did I just walk out of that meeting and not say anything? It might be just, I just felt overwhelmed with anxiety. So it's making sense of it later. So that's about a little bit about handling emotions. Is usually a difficult area that's affected by trauma, and there's ways to get better and learn how to handle them better. There's also the physical body I just mentioned there, about problems might come out physically.